This Thanksgiving, I set a table for 5. Only one person came, the ghost of my past. The waiter looked confused when I said the others were just running late, but I could see it in his eyes. The pity, the familiarity. He'd seen this scene before, and so had I. Every year I pretended someone would show up, and every year I dined alone. My son hadn't called, my grandchildren hadn't remembered, and yet I wore my nicest dress, booked the same booth, and told myself lies sweet enough to swallow. Until a voice broke through the hum of laughter and clinking glasses. Still setting places for ghosts, Maggie. I turned. Breath caught in my throat. There he stood. My grandfather, the man I was told had died 15 years ago. Same eyes, same crooked smile, same quiet strength. And just like that, the dinner turned into something else entirely, something that would change everything I thought I knew about family and about myself. I booked the table for 5. Not out of optimism, more like habit. The same booth in the same restaurant, tucked near the back where I could see the whole room without being seen too clearly myself. I even wore the dress my husband once liked, a deep navy wrap that made me feel a little more visible, a little less disposable. He's been gone 10 years now, but every Thanksgiving I wear it anyway, as if remembering him might anchor me to something real, something that still belongs to me. The hostess didn't ask questions. She just smiled, overly kind, and led me to the booth. 5 place settings, 5 menus, 5 glasses turned upside down in a neat line. But I sat alone. I always sit alone. It wasn't always like this. There were Thanksgivings filled with noise and mashed potatoes that never made it past the kids' end of the table. Years where the turkey was too dry, but nobody cared. Laughter echoing off walls I helped paint. Now those walls belong to other people, and so do the memories. A young couple passed my table. She was carrying a toddler. He was holding a bottle of wine. They looked down at me with a mixture of politeness and confusion. I smiled, not too wide, just enough to make them look away without guilt. The waiter approached and asked if I'd like to start with drinks. I told him water was fine. Maybe wine later, I said, though I wouldn't. He nodded and left. He didn't ask where the others were. He didn't have to. Every year, I told myself this might be the one when someone remembers, when my son calls, when the grandkids show up unexpectedly with a pie they bought last minute and laughter in their voices. But this year felt different. Not because I believed they would come, I didn't, but because I had finally accepted they never would. Still, I showed up. I always do. Because not showing up would mean surrendering to the truth I'm not ready to say out loud. And then, as I stirred the water with the straw, a nervous habit I picked up years ago, I noticed a shadow slow at the edge of my vision, the kind of movement that feels familiar before it makes sense. A cane tapping against the wood floor. I turned my head, and there he was. Old hat, gray coat, weathered face I had etched into memory and buried 15 years ago. My grandfather, the one I was told had died in a hospital 3 states away. No funeral, no goodbyes. Just a line in a phone call. He's gone, sweetheart. He didn't want anyone making a fuss. And yet here he was, older but unmistakable, standing by my table like he'd only been gone a week. Still setting places for ghosts, Maggie? He asked. I couldn't breathe. The water glass slipped from my hand, caught just in time. I blinked, expecting the vision to vanish, but it didn't. He pulled out a chair and sat down. Calm, real. No, he said, as if reading my mind. But it's time you learned why I left. He didn't speak right away. Just sat there, warming his hands around the untouched water glass, eyes scanning my face like he was searching for something he lost long ago. For a moment, I thought I might be hallucinating. Maybe loneliness had finally cracked something in my brain. But the weight of his presence, the creak of the leather seat under him, the faint scent of cedarwood and mothballs, they were too vivid to be imagined. I studied him, almost afraid to blink. The lines on his face were deeper than I remembered. His shoulders stooped slightly, but the quiet dignity he always carried was still there. My chest ached with the ache of something too old to name. You died, I whispered, not as accusation, but as confession, like maybe saying it out loud would help the world make sense again. He looked away, exhaling slowly. That's what they told you. His words fell heavy. They didn't sound like an apology. They sounded like a doorway creaking open. All these years, I'd pictured him buried somewhere cold and unmarked. My mother never gave details, just said he was sick, that he didn't want visitors. A man as proud as him, of course he wouldn't want a fuss. I had believed it. I had mourned him, quietly, alone. But now, the grief I carried felt hollow, like I'd been guarding an empty grave. Why? I asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded napkin, worn soft at the edges. Inside was a photograph, faded, curled at the corners. Me, age 10, missing a front tooth and holding a sparkler on the 4th of July. He slid it across the table like it was proof. Of what, I wasn't sure. I've kept that with me every day, he said, even when they tried to take everything else. I stared at the photo, emotions crashing like waves too big to stand against. Why would a dead man carry my picture? He leaned forward, voice low but firm. They lied to you, Maggie. About me. About your mother. About a lot of things. The clinking and laughter around us blurred into white noise. My world was narrowing, spinning towards the eye of something I didn't yet understand, but I could feel it. This wasn't just a surprise reunion. This was the start of something bigger, something dangerous, and somehow, deep in my gut, I knew. This night would not end the way it began. I couldn't speak. My throat felt dry as if the truth was already lodged there, waiting to rise and choke me. He sat there patient, like a man who knew time didn't heal everything, but silence, when broken carefully, could. Why now? I asked finally. Why after all this time? His gaze didn't waver. Because you stopped hoping. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, sharp and impossibly accurate. And in that moment, I hated how right he was. I had spent years stitching hope into excuses, defending people who had long stopped seeing me. Even tonight, 5 seats for 5 ghosts. And this man, who shouldn't even be alive, had been the only one to show up. I needed to let you grow into your own mind, he continued. If I came too early, they would have rewritten the truth again. You had to see them for who they were. I clenched my hands under the table. Anger started to swell, confusing and misplaced. At him for disappearing. At them for stealing him from me. At myself for not asking harder questions all those years ago. They said you didn't want visitors, I muttered, that you were dying, that I was sick, he said, voice grave, but not dying. And I never said I didn't want you. The lie landed like a hammer. One sentence and the foundation of so much childhood pain cracked open. Every holiday spent wondering, every dream where he stood in the crowd, never waving, every memory I filed under forgotten. He looked tired, but not weak. There was strength in his decision to come now, to pull back a curtain that had hung too long. There's more, he said, much more. But before I can tell you, I need you to remember something first. He slid another item across the table, an old silver locket. My breath caught. I gave this to your mother, he said, and she gave it to you before they took her away. I reached for it, hesitant. It felt cold, heavy, and terrifyingly familiar. Something flickered in the back of my mind, not a memory, but a feeling. A hand brushing my hair, a woman's voice humming something soft, and then screaming, doors slamming, silence. I whispered, I thought my mom left because she didn't want me. His eyes, watery now, locked onto mine. No, Maggie. She tried to fight for you, but the people who raised you, they made sure you never remembered that. I clutched the locket like it might disappear. Its clasp was rusted shut, but I could feel something rattling inside. A tiny piece of paper, maybe a picture. I didn't open it. Not yet. I was too afraid of what I might see, or what I wouldn't. My grandfather watched me closely, as if weighing how much to say next. The restaurant around us continued its joyful chaos. Forks scraping plates, someone singing a birthday song off-key, champagne corks popping, but none of it touched our table. We were sealed in some invisible chamber of truth, where time moved slower and breath felt heavier. He leaned in. "I was there the night they took you from her," he said, barely above a whisper. "Your mother wasn't unstable, Maggie. That's what they wanted you to believe. She was young, in love with the wrong kind of man, see, not rich, not connected, but she wanted you more than she wanted her own freedom." His words stabbed through the old story I'd been told my entire life, that my birth mother had been unfit, reckless, and had walked away. I had accepted it the way a child accepts gravity. Now it shattered like porcelain dropped from a great height. "They threatened her," he continued, "said they'd destroy him, that they'd ruin her life if she didn't give you up. So she gave in under one condition." I stared, mouth dry. "She asked me to stay close to you, to protect you from afar. But the moment I agreed, they cut me off too." "Who are they?" I asked, but I already knew. He said the names I didn't want to hear. My adoptive parents, the ones who raised me, clothed me, taught me how to balance a checkbook and smile through disappointment. But now those memories burned at the edges, like photographs held too close to flame. I felt the floor shifting under my chair, like the booth itself might collapse from the weight of everything I'd just learned. He reached for my hand, rough, calloused fingers around mine. "I didn't come here to break your heart, Maggie. I came because it's time. You deserve to know who you are and where you really come from." The locket pressed against my palm like a heartbeat. "And your mother," he said, voice soft now. "She never stopped looking for you." Something inside me broke, not like glass, but like a seed. Quiet. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just sat there, swallowing the truth like it was warm and bitter, knowing this Thanksgiving would be the last one I'd ever spend pretending. I once thought I had a normal childhood. That belief was something I clung to, like a warm coat with holes I refused to notice. After all, my parents fed me. I had a room, clothes, a school to attend, Christmas presents, sometimes even with my name spelled right. I told myself it was enough. But now, with my grandfather's words still echoing in my head, those memories felt less like warmth and more like frostbite. There was the time I made a birthday card for my mother, not the woman who gave birth to me, but the one who adopted me. I was 6. I had spent hours drawing her holding hands with me under a paper sun. I remember how proud I felt as I handed it to her, waiting for her smile. She looked at the drawing, blinked, then placed it on the kitchen counter without a word. Hours later, I saw it in the trash, under coffee grounds and a banana peel. At the time, I told myself she must have forgotten it was there, that she didn't mean to throw it away. But now, I remember the way her lips tightened when she saw it, like it embarrassed her. Like I embarrassed her. The years rolled by like that, small moments that bled together, birthdays forgotten, punishments for tears I couldn't explain, the way my father flinched when I touched his arm without asking. The house was always spotless, dinner always served on time. But love, real love, the kind that wraps itself around you without condition, I never knew what that felt like. I thought their distance was normal, that all families were like this. After all, they told me I was lucky to have been taken in, that some kids never got a home, that I owed them everything. So I learned not to ask questions. I learned not to cry when they told me to be grateful. I learned to clean my room, keep my head down, and never bring home friends who might ask about the photo frames with no pictures of me in them. I remember one Thanksgiving. I must have been 13 when I burned the yams. Just a little. My mother looked at me like I had shattered a window. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. Her silence was a knife that sliced deeper than any words could have. "We all make sacrifices, Margaret," she said, scraping the burnt tray into the trash. "You should learn to be more careful after everything we've done for you." I nodded, apologized, promised to do better, and deep down I believed I had failed them. But maybe I hadn't failed them at all. Maybe they had failed me in ways I was only just beginning to understand. There was a rule in our house: no locked doors. My bedroom door had no lock, not even a latch. Privacy was a privilege I was told I hadn't earned. We didn't go through all the trouble of raising you just to hide things from us, my mother once said. I remember feeling ashamed, even though I didn't know what I was supposed to be hiding. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, careful not to cry too loud. Tears were inconvenient. My father had no patience for them. "Stop being dramatic," he'd snap if he saw my face redden. "You should be grateful. Most girls like you would be on the street." Like me. That phrase was always said with an edge. I used to wonder what girls like me meant. Poor? Adopted? Unwanted? Eventually, I realized it meant disposable. In school, I kept my head down. I wasn't the loud one, not the pretty one. I was the girl who always had a packed lunch, never asked for sleepovers, and never joined birthday parties after the first few humiliations of waiting for a ride that never came. I told the teachers my parents were just busy, and they believed me because my clothes were clean and my grades were decent. But I remember the day I made honor roll in 8th grade. I printed the certificate myself, carefully tucked it into a red folder, and left it on the kitchen table with a note. "Look what I did." That night, the folder was gone. Not a word was said. When I asked about it, my mother frowned. "Why do you need a pat on the back for doing what's expected?" And that's when it really started to settle in. The idea that I had to earn my place, that love wasn't given, but leased, conditional, fragile, a reward for silence and obedience, not a birthright. Even now, I struggle to celebrate my own small wins. I hear her voice in my head when I try, "Don't be self-centered. You think the world owes you something? But maybe it's not about the world owing me. Maybe I just wanted to be seen, heard, held without question." And for the first time in my life, sitting across from the man I thought was dead, I started to wonder if there was someone, once, who wanted to do exactly that. One of the strangest things about being unloved is how long you pretend otherwise. You build entire stories out of scraps, a glance that wasn't cold, a thank you muttered under breath, a Christmas card with your name on it, even if it was written in someone else's handwriting. But when you look back as an adult, it's like rewatching a movie and realizing the villain was always in the frame. You just didn't know where to look. My birth certificate was always unavailable. I asked once, in high school, for a copy to apply for something, a summer job maybe. My mother tensed. "We have it somewhere," she said, brushing me off. "You don't need to worry about that right now." I asked again a few weeks later and she snapped, "Why are you so obsessed with things that don't matter? Don't you trust us?" I didn't ask again. But years later, filling out paperwork for a passport, I had to request it myself. What arrived wasn't what I expected. The paper was faded, official but edited, typed in places that should have been handwritten. No hospital listed. And the parents' names, both were mine. My adoptive parents, as if no one else had ever existed. It felt wrong, but I filed it away and told myself it must be standard. I didn't know how much was missing. And then there were the photographs, or the absence of them. No baby pictures before age 3, no maternity photos, no hospital bracelets, not a single image of my mother pregnant. I once asked her about it, half joking, and she waved me off. "You came to us in a different way," she said. "Be thankful you're here at all." Even now, those words make my stomach twist. I remember finding an old shoebox once tucked behind linens in the hallway closet. Inside was a small yellowed envelope. No name, no markings. Just a black and white photo of a woman holding a newborn, her eyes swollen, her mouth set in something between grief and defiance. She looked like me. I was maybe 17. I brought it to my mother, hoping for a story. Instead, she tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. "You shouldn't snoop," she said without raising her voice. "You don't want to find things that don't concern you." But it did concern me. It always had. I just hadn't allowed myself to believe it. Until now. I used to think I was the difficult one. Too quiet, too sensitive, too needy. Every outburst I buried, every question I swallowed became more proof, in their eyes and eventually in mine, that I should simply be grateful and stay small. But now, sitting here decades later with a man who'd been erased from my story, I saw it for what it really was. Not parenting, but possession. They didn't raise me out of love. They kept me out of guilt, or perhaps worse, out of image. I made them look generous, noble even. The child they rescued, the life they gave. And in return, I owed them silence. What they called sacrifice, I now saw as control. What they called discipline, I now recognized as shame. And what they claimed as love, wasn't. I remember once in my 20s, I brought home a man I was dating. Kind, soft-spoken, the kind who noticed when I was tired without saying a word. My father watched him all night, then said afterward, "He's weak. You need someone who can handle you." Handle me, as if I were a problem to be restrained, not a woman to be known. That night I broke it off with that man, not because I wanted to, but because their voice echoed louder in my head than my own. I had been taught to mistrust my instincts, to defer always to their version of what was best for me, even when that meant giving up pieces of myself I hadn't realized were already gone. And now, with my grandfather watching me, not judging, not instructing, just seeing me, I realized this was the first time in my entire life I was being allowed to question it all, to say out loud what I'd never dared. They didn't love me. Not really. They tolerated me, molded me, kept me, but they never chose me. And worse, they made sure no one else could either. He waited until we were back in his car to tell me where we were going. The ride was quiet, the heater humming low, the windshield wipers brushing away a soft drizzle. I stared at the road, feeling the weight of everything I had just unearthed, and the fear of what still waited ahead. "She's not far," he said, eyes on the road. "Lives in a care facility a few towns over." I didn't ask who. Something in his tone told me this visit wouldn't be easy. We pulled into a quiet brick building surrounded by leafless trees and a sagging white fence. It didn't look like a place where secrets lived. But maybe that's why it worked. No one would think to look here. Inside, the scent of disinfectant and overcooked vegetables clung to the air. A nurse led us down a hall painted in muted pastels, nodding respectfully at my grandfather. He was clearly known here. Trusted. "She has good days and bad ones," the nurse whispered as she opened a door. "Today's somewhere in between." I stepped inside the room, heart thudding. An older woman sat in a faded armchair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, a crocheted blanket over her knees. Her hair was thin, snow-white, and pinned back with a barrette that looked far too young for her age. At first, she didn't look up, just kept staring out the window at nothing in particular. Then her eyes moved slowly to me, and for a moment, just a moment, her entire face changed. She blinked hard as if trying to clear decades of fog from her memory. Her lips parted, then trembled. "Margie," she said. The name hit me like a stone. No one had called me that in over 50 years. My voice caught. "Do I know you?" She smiled, not wide but deep, from someplace buried, someplace sacred. "I held you when you were just minutes old," she whispered. "You had the loudest cry I ever heard. Your mother said you were announcing your place in the world." My knees buckled slightly. I reached for the edge of the bed to steady myself. This woman, this quiet, trembling woman, had been there. She had seen me at the very beginning, before the edits and erasures and paper trails meant to make me someone else. And somehow she remembered. She asked for water, and I poured her a glass with trembling hands. My grandfather stood quietly in the corner, giving us space, though his presence felt like a tether, grounding me in a moment that might have otherwise swept me away. Her name was Lorraine. She had been my mother's roommate in the maternity ward. Just a teenager herself back then, recovering from a complicated birth, clinging to her newborn and her place in a world that seemed too eager to shove young women aside. "We weren't supposed to talk," she said, her voice cracking with age and emotion. "Girls like us, unwed, poor, no future. We were treated like problems to be solved, not people." She looked at me with watery eyes. "But your mother, she wasn't like the others. She was fierce, refused to cry, even when they threatened to take you. She held you so tightly, like she could protect you just by sheer will." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing heavier with each word. "She named you Elena," Lorraine said softly. "Not Margaret. That came later, didn't it?" I nodded. I had never heard the name Elena before, never seen it on paper, and yet, when she said it, something inside me stirred, a flicker of recognition, like a bell rung far away. "What happened that night?" I asked. "How did they take me?" Lorraine's hands trembled. She clutched the edge of her blanket, like it could keep her anchored in the past she was about to revisit. "Your mother fell asleep holding you. She hadn't slept in almost 2 days. She was so afraid they'd take you the moment she blinked. But exhaustion won, just for an hour." She paused. "When she woke up, you were gone. The nurse said you were being examined, but it wasn't true. They had already signed papers. Papers your mother never saw." She looked at me, voice shaking. "By the time she found out, you were already at your adoptive parents' house." She screamed, fought. Security came. They sedated her, told her she was unstable. The room tilted. "They made her think she was crazy," I whispered. Lorraine nodded slowly. "It was easier that way. Easier to paint her as broken. Easier to call it a mercy." I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying to hold in the tears. "And you?" I asked. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I tried," she said, "but I was 17. No one listened, and when I pushed too hard, I was moved, sent out of state. No warning, just gone." She reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age. "I kept this," she said, "just in case you ever came." Inside was a photo, a grainy black and white image of a young woman in a hospital bed, clutching a baby with dark hair and wide, startled eyes. Me. And beside her, smiling but tired, was a woman who looked so much like me it stole the breath from my lungs. "My mother," I whispered. Lorraine nodded. "She never stopped calling you Elena. Not once." The photo sat in my lap like a live wire, fragile, but crackling with a kind of quiet fury. I traced the image with my fingers, studying the woman who had held me once and somehow always. Her eyes were unmistakable. Mine. And the way her hand cupped my head, as if to shield me from the world, told me more than any birth certificate ever could. "She fought for me," I said aloud, more to the room than anyone in it. Lorraine nodded, her voice gentle. "She wasn't weak. They wanted you to believe she was. It's easier to erase a mother when you paint her as unstable." The hospital records had been changed, she explained. Notes added to suggest my mother had postpartum psychosis, erratic behavior, paranoia, delusions, all fabricated. There were no medical flags in her chart until the morning after I disappeared from her arms. "She spent years trying to undo it," Lorraine continued, "filed petitions, letters to judges, even tried to find a lawyer, but no one would take her case. Every door closed faster than the one before. The pieces began to click into place. The missing documents, the altered birth certificate, the adoptive parents who never let me ask questions, the hostile silence around anything that came before them. It hadn't been an adoption, it had been a theft. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. The air felt thin. "Where is she now?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Lorraine hesitated. "She left this town almost 30 years ago," she said. "Moved out west. Changed her name, started over but never let go." Something flickered in her eyes. Pity? Regret? "She wrote to me every few years," Lorraine said, "just to ask if anyone had come looking for her, if Elena had come back." The thought of her waiting, writing letters into silence, sending hope into the void, made my chest ache. She had never given up. Even after being labeled insane, even after losing everything, she still believed one day I would find her. And now, I might. Back in the car, I didn't speak for a long time. The envelope lay open in my lap, the photo still trembling in my hands as if it had a heartbeat of its own. The city lights blurred outside the window, but I wasn't seeing streets or signs. I was seeing hospital rooms, locked drawers, shredded documents, a young mother drugged into silence while strangers stole her baby. And sitting next to me, quiet, calm, was the only person who could have stopped it. "You knew," I said finally. My grandfather didn't flinch. "You knew they were lying, that they took me, that she never gave me away." "I did," he said quietly. My throat burned. "Then why didn't you stop them? Why did you disappear?" His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. "I tried," he said. "God knows I tried, but I was outnumbered. Your adoptive father, and he was powerful, connected. And your grandmother, she saw your mother's pregnancy as shame, something that would stain the family name. I argued, I begged, but by the time I realized how far they'd gone, it was too late." He glanced at me, eyes glassy. "They told me you were being sent to a loving family, that it was better this way, cleaner, safer, and when I asked to see you, they told me you'd already forgotten us." I turned to him sharply. "You believed that?" "No," he said, "but I wanted to. Because the alternative, knowing you'd been raised thinking you were unwanted, unloved, that was too much." The pain in his voice wasn't performative. It was old, heavy, like a stone he'd carried for so long it had become part of him. "Why now?" I whispered. "Why wait 30 years? He pulled the car over, parked beneath a flickering street lamp. For the first time that night, he looked small, not in body, but in spirit. "Because I thought I'd never see you again," he said. "But last year, I found out your mother died." The words hit me like cold water. He looked down. "She left everything to you in a sealed file, a trust, instructions. But the lawyers couldn't find you, and not under Margaret." He reached into the glove box and handed me a thin leather folder. Inside, written in looping, uneven handwriting, were 3 words: "To my daughter, Elena." The folder felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of every lie ever told in my name. I sat with it in my lap, in a motel room off a quiet road, the kind of place with flickering lights and carpet that smelled like old smoke. My grandfather was down the hall, giving me space. He understood this was something I needed to face alone. I opened it slowly, almost afraid that the truth might vanish if I looked too fast. The first thing I saw was a letter, folded, creased at the corners, and addressed in careful cursive. "To my daughter, Elena, in case the world never lets me hold you again." My hands shook as I opened it. "You were born at 6:42 a.m. on a rainy Thursday. You came into this world angry and loud, and I laughed through my tears because I thought this one's going to survive anything. I named you Elena because it sounded like light, and because I wanted that for you. A life full of light, not shadows, not shame. They took you while I slept. I begged, screamed, swore I would never stop looking. They said I was unstable, dangerous. They erased me from the paperwork, told everyone I had moved on. But I never did. I don't know what they told you, or what name you grew up with. But please know, you were wanted, you were loved, you still are." I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the ink on the page start to bleed under my fingertips. Below the letter was a stack of documents, hospital records, legal petitions, journal entries, years of attempts, all denied, all ignored. She had fought longer and harder than anyone ever told me, and she had done it alone. Then I saw the last page, a map, hand-drawn, a house circled in red ink, and a note. "If you ever find this, she still lives here. Your sister." My breath caught. My heart stopped. I had a sister. The road to the address on the map cut through stretches of farmland and pine trees, winding into a town so small it didn't even have a gas station. It felt like driving backward through time. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, not out of fear, but to keep them from shaking. I kept replaying my mother's letter in my head, the way she wrote my name, Elena, with such certainty, like she had never once forgotten it. Or me. The house came into view slowly, nestled behind a line of cypress trees. It wasn't big, paint peeling slightly, porch sagging in the middle. But there were wind chimes by the door and marigolds in the window boxes. Signs of life, of care. I parked down the street and stared at it, heart thudding. What do you say to someone who shares your blood but not your history? To a stranger who could look like you or nothing like you at all? I walked up the path, every step heavier than the last. When I reached the door, I hesitated. There were sounds inside. Footsteps, then a laugh. Feminine, roughened by age or maybe just experience. I raised my hand and knocked. Silence. Then the door opened, and I saw her. She was taller than me, slim, hair the same color as mine, streaked with gray but pulled back in a neat braid. Her face was older, worn, but I could see the resemblance immediately. In the eyes, the shape of her mouth, the way she tilted her head like she was reading me before I even spoke. "Yes?" she said cautiously. I opened my mouth, then closed it. My voice had deserted me. I tried again. I think we might be sisters." Her expression didn't change at first, just stillness. Then slowly, she exhaled. Her eyes filled, not with shock, but with something stranger, recognition. "You're Elena," she whispered. "Aren't you?" I nodded, unable to speak. She stared at me for a long second, then stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," she said. "Mama always said you'd find your way home." Her name was June. She made tea without asking what I liked, and I appreciated that. It reminded me of how family just knows, or pretends to, until they do. We sat at a small kitchen table covered in hand-stitched cloth, the kind my grandmother used to make. A photo of our mother sat on the windowsill, smiling, alive, beautiful in a quiet, devastating way. "She never got over you," June said, staring at the cup in her hands. "Not really. She went on with life, worked at the library, grew vegetables, made friends, but there was always this pause in her joy. Like something unfinished was always pulling her slightly backward." I nodded, too afraid to speak. Too afraid to interrupt something sacred. "She never had other children," June said. "She raised me like her own, but biologically, I wasn't hers. My parents died when I was 5, and she took me in. No questions asked, just loved me, fully, fiercely." I blinked. "So we're not sisters by blood?" "No, but I think you were always the missing half. The piece she lost, the one she never stopped searching for. She told me your name before mine." A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. "She wrote to you every year," June continued. "Even when letters came back unopened, she'd rewrite them, just in case you'd moved, just in case someone changed their mind. I once asked why she kept writing. She said, because one day Elena might read them, and I want her to know I never gave up." There was a box on the counter. June stood, pulled it down gently, and set it in front of me. Inside were dozens of envelopes, carefully preserved, each one addressed to Elena, wherever you are. I picked one up. The postmark was 15 years old. "I kept them all," June said, "even the ones that came back. She said it didn't matter where they landed. You faint." The words were real, and someday you'd find them. I ran my fingers over the handwriting. It was unmistakable, the same as the letter in the folder. Each loop and curve carried her voice, her hope. "She passed peacefully," June said softly, "in her sleep. But the last thing she said to me was, 'Tell Elena I kept the light on.'" I closed my eyes. Somewhere in the home I grew up in, full of ice-cold manners and spotless counters. There had always been a woman across the country writing letters to a daughter who didn't know she was loved, until now. Before I left, June handed me a small wooden box carved by hand, the corners worn smooth by years of handling. She kept this by her bed, she said it was yours when you were ready. It had no key, just a simple latch. I waited until I was alone to open it. The motel room felt different now, not like a place of rest, but a sacred chamber for unveiling what had been buried too long. I set the box on the table, took a breath, and opened it. Inside was a collection of tiny treasures. A hospital bracelet with Elena, baby girl, written in faded ink. A lock of dark hair tied with a red ribbon. A pair of booties, clearly hand-knitted, worn soft at the soles. And beneath it all, a cassette tape. I blinked. The label was handwritten. For Elena, don't let them rewrite you. My hands shook as I slid it into an old portable player June had given me. There was a click, a hiss. Then, her voice, soft, wavering, but unmistakably her. Hi, my love. I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but if you are, that means you found your way back. And I'm so proud of you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from what happened. I'm sorry I couldn't hold you longer, but I want you to know, I never, ever let go of you in my heart. They told me I was crazy, that I imagined your cries at night. But I wasn't crazy, I was grieving, and grieving mothers remember every sound. There's something I couldn't put in writing, something I was too afraid they'd intercept. Her voice paused, then dropped to a whisper. You weren't just taken, you were sold. The room went silent. My skin turned to ice. It wasn't just about shame or image. It was about money. They paid to make you disappear. And someone close to the family, helped them do it. The tape clicked. That was all. I sat frozen, unable to move. Everything I thought I knew had already crumbled. But now, from those ruins, another story was beginning. Darker, deeper, and far from over. And whoever had paid for my silence, they were still out there. I didn't sleep that night. The cassette tape played in my head on a loop, each word like a slow dripping poison. You weren't just taken, you were sold. It changed everything. Not just the story I'd been told, but the people I thought I knew. Who had paid? Who had profited? And worse, who was still keeping the secret? By morning, I was back on the road, heading toward the town I grew up in. The place where the lie was born. I hadn't been there in years. Not since my father passed and my mother, or the woman I'd called mother, had moved into assisted living. The house was still there. Same red shutters, same white porch swing that no one ever used. But something about it now felt artificial, like a movie set frozen in time, a monument to a life I never actually lived. I parked across the street and stared. Inside that house were documents, journals, financial records. My father had kept everything, but meticulous, paranoid. If there was proof of a transaction, it would be in his files. He never trusted anyone, not even his own accountant. The key was still in the fake rock near the steps. I stepped inside and was struck by the sterile scent of lemon polish and old wood. Nothing had changed. Same furniture. Same carefully arranged family portraits, none of which included me before age 3. I went straight to the study. The filing cabinet was locked, but the bottom drawer had always been loose. I jimmied it open with a ruler from the desk, heart pounding. Inside were folders, thick, labeled by year. I flipped through them, looking for anything that connected to 1961, the year I was born. And there it was, a manila folder marked only with 2 initials, E.W. I froze. My initials. Elena Wright. Hands shaking, I opened it. Inside were receipts, hospital invoices, legal fees. But then, tucked between the papers, I saw it. A check stub, dated 3 weeks after my birth, made out to a private agency I didn't recognize. And the amount... I covered my mouth. $10,000. Not a donation, not a reimbursement, a payment. At the bottom, written in my father's handwriting, was a note. Finalized. No further contact. She is ours now. The room spun. My knees buckled and I caught myself on the desk. I had been bought. Like property. Like a secret. And the person who arranged it had signed the check with a name I never expected to see. The name on the check was written in clean, practiced cursive, the kind reserved for wedding invitations and legal documents, but I recognized it instantly. Eleanor Whitaker, my grandmother. She had always been the quiet force behind everything. Rarely spoke unless prompted, but when she did, people listened. I remembered her as cold, composed, and impossible to read, a woman who could silence a room with one glance. Growing up, I feared her more than my parents, not because she yelled, but because she didn't need to. I hadn't seen her in nearly a decade. After my father's death, she withdrew even more, living in a private retirement estate just outside of town. No visitors unless pre-approved, no calls unless scheduled, but I knew someone who could get me in. An hour later, I was standing in the marble lobby of Roseview Estates. The concierge eyed me with suspicion until I handed her my ID and said, "I'm her granddaughter." That still carried weight. They sent someone to fetch her. When Eleanor walked in, she hadn't changed. Her silver hair was pulled into a bun so tight it might have held secrets. She wore pearls, always pearls, and a navy suit that looked custom-pressed. Her cane clicked as she approached, but her eyes? Still razor sharp. She sat down across from me in a private meeting room and folded her hands. "Well, she said, "this is a surprise." I took a deep breath. No preamble. "I found the folder." She didn't blink. "What folder?" "The one with my name on it. The one with the check you signed, $10,000, dated 3 weeks after I was born." Still, no reaction. Just a small exhale. Like a teacher waiting for a student to finish a tantrum. "Say what you came to say, Margaret." "Elena," I corrected. "My name is Elena." A flicker, brief, sharp, passed through her eyes, and then she smiled, not kindly. "You were always too curious for your own good. You lied to me." She tilted her head. "No. We created stability. We offered you something your birth mother couldn't. You stole me. We rescued you." She snapped, her voice suddenly brittle. "Your mother was reckless. Her choices would have ruined you. We gave you structure, a future, and you're welcome." I stood, my pulse pounding. "You bought me. Like a car, like property, and you let her believe she was crazy." "She was crazy," she hissed. "Anyone who fights that hard for a mistake is unstable by definition." My voice broke. "I wasn't a mistake." She looked away then. The first real crack in her armor. "No," she said, "but you were inconvenient." And with that, I left. I drove for hours after leaving Roseview Estates, not sure where I was headed, only that I couldn't be still. Her words haunted me. Cold, clinical, perfectly rehearsed. "You were inconvenient." It echoed louder than any insult I'd ever heard. By the time I reached a quiet overlook outside town, the sky had begun to turn violet with dusk. I parked, stepped out into the cool air, and finally let myself fall apart. Tears came fast. Not loud, not messy, just endless. The kind that belonged not to grief alone, but to betrayal. A lifetime's worth of it. Every birthday I'd spent wondering why I felt hollow. Every holiday where their smiles felt forced, like actors too tired to stay in character. And now I knew why. Because I wasn't their daughter. I was their asset, their cleanup job, their reputation repair. I sat on a bench overlooking the lake, the cassette player in my lap. The tape rewound to the exact moment she whispered, "They sold you." I played it again. Not to hear the words, but to remember her voice. My real mother. The only one who ever spoke to me without an agenda. "What do I do now?" I asked the wind. The trees. The silence. Expose them? Go to the press? Write the book? Tell the world what they'd done? How they'd stolen a life and buried it beneath dinner parties and tennis club dues? Or walk away? Start fresh. Be Elena finally. Let the past burn itself out. But even as I asked, I knew There are some lies too heavy to carry, and some truths too sacred to bury. I opened my phone, found the file I'd scanned, the check, the hospital paperwork, the notes in my grandmother's handwriting. I created a folder, titled it Proof. Then I sent it to June, with one message: "I'm ready." June called within minutes. "I knew you'd find something," she said, breathless, as if she'd been holding her lungs tight for years. "I just didn't know it would be this undeniable." We met the next morning at a small coffee shop between our towns, neutral ground, where the weight of truth could settle without tipping the floor beneath us. I slid the envelope across the table. She opened it with care but no hesitation. Each document, each note, the check, the timeline, proof. When she reached the end, she looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. "We go public," she said. "Media, a lawyer, whatever it takes." She fought too long for this to die in a drawer. I nodded, but a question lingered in the space between us. "What if no one believes us?" I asked. "They're powerful, well-liked. They'll say we're bitter, confused, looking for attention." June reached into her purse, pulled out a small velvet pouch, and handed it to me. Inside was a pendant, the twin to the locket my grandfather had given me weeks ago. "She had two made," June said softly. "One for you, one she wore until the day she died. That's the one they couldn't take from her. She wore it through every court date, every letter, every breakdown." I clutched it tightly. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, froze. It's from Lorraine," she said. "She wants to talk, now." Lorraine, the woman from the care facility, my mother's old roommate, the one who remembered it all. June put her phone on speaker and answered. Lorraine's voice crackled through the line, hoarse but urgent. "Someone came to see me last night," she said. "A man, older, said he used to work for the agency, said the story wasn't over." We exchanged a look. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning in. "He said he had records. Files that never got destroyed, adoption swaps, private payments. And Elena? He said you weren't the only one." My chest tightened. "Not the only one?" "What's his name?" June asked. There was a pause. Then Lorraine spoke, her voice trembling. "He said he used to go by Gerald, but you might know him as Father James." The name hit me like a lightning strike. Father James, the priest who baptized me, who visited our home every Christmas, who blessed our table every Thanksgiving like a ghost slipping through tradition. And suddenly, the story cracked open wider. This wasn't just about my family, it was about many, and it was just beginning. I never imagined the final piece of my story would come from a man in a collar. Father James had been a fixture in our lives, quiet, kind, always with a warm word and a steady presence. He baptized me when I was 3, the only photo my parents ever framed of us together. He visited during holidays, always brought books instead of toys, and smelled faintly of incense and old books. I used to think he was the only adult who truly saw me. Now I knew he had, and he looked away. The meeting was set for a Tuesday in a public library conference room an hour outside town. Neutral ground. Lorraine came with June, who hadn't left my side since the call. I came armed with copies of everything, the check, the documents, the photo, the tapes. I didn't know what I expected to hear. Confession? Denial? Maybe something in between. The kind of apology that asked for forgiveness without taking blame. But when he walked in, his back was more hunched than I remembered, his collar gone, civilian clothes now. He looked tired. Not from age, but from carrying something far heavier than scripture. He sat, looked at me, and then said it. I helped them. 3 words, no hesitation, no sugarcoating. He pulled a thick folder from his bag, unmarked, tied with string, and slid it across the table. "That's everything I saved. I wasn't supposed to, but after you, after your mother, I couldn't destroy it all." Inside, names, birth dates, photos, handwritten notes, payments, dozens. Some crossed out, some marked placed, some marked returned, one marked deceased. Each file was a child, a mother, a story lost. Each one a life rerouted like mine. I stayed quiet too long, he said. Told myself I was helping. That placing children with better families was a kindness. But it wasn't about kindness. It was about control. And money. My voice was thin. You knew I was stolen. He met my eyes. Yes, and I said nothing. And for that, I will never stop asking forgiveness. Silence filled the room. Then June spoke. What do we do with this? He looked at her, then at me. You burn it all down, he said. We didn't sleep that night. The folder from Father James lay open on the motel bed, its contents spilling across the comforter like evidence from a crime scene, which in a way it was. Every name, every scribbled note, every receipt was another life rerouted. Some files were incomplete, others were hauntingly detailed. June sat beside me, cross-referencing names with public records. Some were alive, others missing. A few had grown up nearby without ever knowing they weren't who they thought they were, just like me. We made a plan. First, the press. A journalist June knew, someone she trusted, had covered adoption fraud cases before. We uploaded scans of the documents, redacted names where needed, then the lawyer. A civil rights group had already begun investigating historical adoption scams. They were eager to meet. By morning, we had emails scheduled, statements drafted. We weren't just telling my story anymore. We were opening a door no one could close again, but we weren't the only ones watching. At noon, June got a call from her job. Her hours had been suspended pending review. 2 hours later, the journalist emailed. Her editor was concerned about legal exposure. By nightfall, someone had tried to access my cloud drive. The failed login alerts flooded my phone. We were being warned. June looked at me across the table. They're scared. Good, I said. They should be. But fear cuts both ways. That night, I received a private message from a blocked number. No name, just a short clinical threat. Let the dead stay buried. Walk away, Elena. Final warning. I stared at it, pulse thudding. They still thought I was the girl who stayed silent, the girl who played along. But they forgot something. I wasn't just Elena now. I was my mother's daughter. The knock came just after sunset. I opened the motel door to find my uncle, my adoptive father's younger brother, standing stiffly in a tan coat, jaw set like stone. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the funeral. He'd always been the family's fixer, a lawyer with too many favors and not enough scruples. He didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped in like the room was still his. You need to stop, he said, voice flat. Whatever it is you think you found, bury it. I stared at him. You knew. He didn't deny it. I knew the basics, he said, that you weren't really theirs, that it was handled quietly. But I didn't ask questions. That was the arrangement. The arrangement, I echoed. You mean the sale? His jaw tightened. You think this helps anyone? Dragging dead people through the mud? Tearing down reputations? For what? Closure? For truth, I snapped. For the people they erased. For my mother. She was unstable. She was silenced. He stepped closer. You don't understand the kind of people involved in this, Elena. This isn't just family drama. This goes deep. Judges, banks, churches, people with money and reach, people who don't lose. I folded my arms. Then they're about to. He stared at me, expression unreadable. Then softer. You're not scared? Of course I am, I said, but I'm more tired of lying. A long pause. Then he reached into his coat and dropped a USB on the table. I made a copy, he said, 20 years ago, just in case. I looked at him, stunned. Why? He exhaled. Because I was there the day they took you, and I've never forgotten the sound of your mother screaming. He left without another word. I stared at the drive, its cold silver glint catching the motel's yellow light. Another piece of the puzzle, and one step closer to a reckoning no one could stop. The courtroom was full, not of family, not the ones who raised me, but of people like me. Survivors, truth-tellers, daughters and sons who had lived their lives wearing names that didn't belong to them, loving parents who weren't theirs, grieving mothers they were told never existed. Beside me sat June. Beside her, Lorraine. In the row behind us, the journalist, the civil rights attorney, and two others who had come forward after seeing our story on the local news, each with files, photos, proof. The judge called us to order, cameras rolled, and I stood, not as Margaret, not as a woman searching for closure, but as Elena Wright, daughter of a woman named Anne who fought until her last breath to be heard. I gave them the whole story, the forged records, the payments, the names. The network that ran through hospitals, churches, and courtrooms. I read my mother's letter aloud. I played the tape. Some wept. Some sat in stunned silence. And when I finished, the room didn't clap. It breathed, like a truth too long buried had finally surfaced, and everyone had to relearn how to inhale. In the days that followed, the news spread. More came forward. A formal investigation began. A task force was created. And Father James, who had finally turned over everything, testified again, this time with no collar, no fear. My grandmother never spoke to me again, but I didn't need her voice. I had found my own. Back home, I placed the photo of my mother, young, proud, clutching me in a faded hospital bed, on the mantel. I lit a candle beside it and whispered, "We made it." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a missing piece. I felt whole.